You have the power to be agenda setters. Now, we looked at this image in week 2 when we talked about the difference between fact and truth. And I think it helps illustrate Megan Kemerick's point about getting the whole picture. As journalists, it's our job to be seekers of the truth. And if there's one thing I want you to walk away with from this class, besides the ability to write a good article or identify an audience or engage strategically on social media, it's the ability to recognize that truth is complicated. And whether you're a journalist or not, it's up to you to be responsible carriers of the truth. How do you get outside of that algorithmic echo chamber of social media to see viewpoints outside of your own filter bubble? How do you sort through the bias and hidden agendas, facts, and opinions? How do you challenge the status quo? How do you prepare yourself ethically and morally to become cultural agenda setters? Furthermore, how do you navigate this convergence culture to blaze new trails in communications? Well, it starts with being willing to be uncomfortable. The truth is, by nature, uncomfortable. And in this new postmodern globalized landscape, I think we have to reimagine how we think about truth. Now, the way most people think about truth, without even knowing it, comes all the way from Plato. It's been subtly enculturated into us over a few thousand of years, and it's called the Correspondence Model of truth. Plato describes it in his famous allegory of the cave, in which there are these prisoners who have spent their whole life chained up to face the wall of a cave, and the only thing they can see is the shadows cast by a puppet show being projected from behind them, so that they think the shadow of the pot is the true pot. And that must be all there is to a pot, because that's all they've ever known. Until one day, one of the prisoners gets free and climbs up to see not only the even truer pot puppet that's been casting the shadows, but he also makes his way all the way up to the surface, and once adjusting to the blinding light of the sun, kind of like I am here, he sees the actual pot, and his mind is blown. And of course, he goes back down to tell his friends the truth of the matter, and he's immediately ostracized, labeled as a lunatic and a heretic, as many who challenge the status quo often are. See, Plato believed that there are different levels of truth, that there's a true cup, the Platonic ideal notion of a cup that exists out there somewhere. And everything we see is just some derivation of that truth. So we know something is a cup by testing it out against our notion of a true cup and seeing how much it corresponds. And at some point when something no longer corresponds, we can slough it off and discard it as being definitively not a cup. The danger of this correspondence model is that this is all well and good when we're talking about things like cups. But what happens when we view the world this way and we're talking about things like people? Who really can claim to have sole authority or adequate perspective to be able to see what the truth is, what a true human really is? What happens when we come to something that no longer fits our ideal? Do we slough it off and get rid of it? Rationalize our behaviors as we dehumanize that which is different than the cave shadows we grew up with? This is exactly the kind of thinking that, when pushed to its extremes, leads to racism, bigotry, even genocide and Holocaust. Now, Heidegger, however, noticed something in Plato's story. While we all thought that this was a story about the true nature of things, he realized that this was actually a story about education. It was only once the prisoner stepped outside of his context and saw the world from a different perspective that he got any closer to the truth. The cup is not a cup because of how much it corresponds to an ideal notion of a cup. The cup is a cup because of the complex web of relations and associations it inhabits. So Heidegger proposes a new model of thinking about truth, what's come to be known as the relational model of truth. We know that this is a cup because of its functions and its uses, because of what it relates to and connects to, because it conjures up memories of water or coffee, or dinner parties, or other beverage containers. And so maybe, if given the right circumstances, this boot is not so definitively not a cup after all. A truth is an uncomfortable friction because each object has a web of relationships around it, a world around it, and each person has a specific and unique worldview. And truth is the uncomfortable friction where worldviews collide and grind against each other. After all, Galileo showed us that we only saw the universe when we realized it looks different to someone else. Truth is born out of those messy intersections of worldviews. So, we come back to our discussion of ethics. What is your ethical model for navigating these relational intersections? How do you step outside of your own worldview, adjust your eyes to the blinding sunlight of someone else's perspective, and walk a mile in their boots? Fortunately, that's what this many-to-many paradigm is all about, the intersection of worldviews. You are part of this many-to-many relationalism, whether you acknowledge it or not. But you are privileged. You may be part of the many, but you're being educated as though you're the one. You're gaining all the skills of the one, but with all the savvy and the sensibilities and the connectivities of the many. You have the ability and the responsibility to be stewards of truth for your audience, whoever that might be, in whatever field you pursue. You help people separate fact from fiction. You have all the tools you need now, right here in those little black boxes that you carry around in your pockets. All the tools except perhaps for one, and that's the knowledge of how to make the truth look pretty. And that's essentially what we cover in COMM250 editing for converging media, where we look at how to package and present the content that you develop, from photo editing to video editing, from branding to social media management. But that's a class for another day. So now, go out and be agenda setters. Be responsible stewards of truth in this weird new landscape of converging media. Because I don't mean to say it flippantly or as a cliche when I say that when you close this browser window and walk out of whatever room you're in, you are indeed stepping into the future. And it's a future unlike anything we've ever quite seen in the history of humankind. So use what you've learned to go make this future a good one. Thank you for all of your time this semester. Have a fantastic summer, and I look forward to seeing you around next year. Cheers.